Hey, what's up, everybody? Welcome back to News Dose. And it's honestly crazy to me that in 2023, just 1 year ago, it was viewed as one of the greatest years ever for gaming. There was a ton of just absolutely fantastic games last year, but as odd as it might seem, all of that kind of feels like ancient history now. Because if you fast forward to today, you have to kind of wonder yourself, what went so wrong? I mean, seriously, what happened? Because most of the news this year has been concerning for the future of gaming. There's just layoffs everywhere. There's concern over the quality of writing in AAA games. There's questions about ballooning budgets and the stagnation of consoles generation over generation. There's frustration over censorship. And worst of all, there's all of these studio closures as well. In fact, if you haven't already heard, today, Xbox and Bethesda announced that they're closing 4 different studios, which includes a beloved developer that worked on one of last year's best games, being Hi-Fi Rush. Yeah, talk about deflating. For all those that's been watching the channel for a while, you probably know how much I love this game, but we are going to get into all of that today. Thankfully, we do have some good news to talk about as well, thanks to Nintendo. We did get some information for the Switch successor and even a Nintendo Direct, so this might take some of that sting off just a little bit. But you know what? Let's just go and get right into this. So yes, Microsoft shut down 4 Bethesda studios. This was confirmed through an internal email, and this includes Arcane Austin, which worked on games like Prey and Redfall. Obviously, Redfall didn't exactly pan out the way that they wanted it to, but Prey, that's still an excellent game. They did have some talent over there. But this move kind of speaks to that fear that one AAA failure can absolutely destroy a studio. AAA games, they're just risky to make. The closures also include Alpha Dog Games, which is a smaller mobile studio. This isn't really a household name. A lot of people probably won't recognize this one, but they worked on Mighty Doom. Microsoft does have aspirations for mobile gaming, so while this is a smaller, lesser-known studio, it's still something that takes them away from their ultimate goal to get into mobile gaming. Then they also closed Roundhouse Studios. Now, unlike some of the others here, though, it won't be completely shut down. Instead, it's going to be absorbed by ZeniMax Online Studios. So, silver lining, at least they're retaining their jobs to some extent. But the most baffling decision, and this one is just frustrating in every sense of the word, they sadly shut down Tango Gameworks just 1 year after the release of Hi-Fi Rush. Looking back at last year, it was such a surprising feel-good story. It kind of came out of nowhere, and fans adored that game. It was a Game of the Year contender. It won multiple awards, and it was praised as one of last year's best games and really just one of Xbox's best games, period. So it's kind of strange that this feel-good game from last year kind of represents the polar opposite in 2024. It's still a great game. Definitely go play it if you haven't already. I can't encourage you to play it enough. There's really nothing else like it. But in a weird way, it's the new poster child for everything that's wrong with Xbox and the industry as a whole. These publishers are moving away from these creative, unique games unless it's a surefire hit. In fact, Xbox's Matt Booty said something very interesting that stood out to me. He blamed the cuts and closures on quote-unquote reprioritization of titles and resources. Now, what this essentially means is that they're shifting their investment to other franchises that they probably deem as more important. This is actually a very similar statement to what Square Enix just announced last week, as they're also prioritizing AAA games going forward. So what this essentially means for Bethesda is that they'll likely shift focus to other games like The Elder Scrolls 6 and Fallout. And okay, we all love those games, there's no doubt about that, but destroying one of their most praised studios in the process, I don't really think was the answer. Even more baffling here, though, is that Tango Gameworks was Xbox's only Japanese studio, a region that they have historically struggled in, and they just axed a studio from that region. Phil Spencer keeps talking about how they want more Japanese studios, and, they had one in Tango Gameworks, a really great one at that. Now, Shinji Mikami, the mastermind behind the first Evil Within, he left the studio not long ago, and I've seen a lot of people theorize that's why Microsoft shut them down, but I completely disagree with that. The thing about Tango Gameworks is that Shinji Mikami built this studio in a way to foster young talent. That was one of his goals, and that showed up in The Evil Within 2 and also with Hi-Fi Rush. Those games were not directed by Shinji Mikami. Shinji Mikami might have been the most recognized person in the studio, but he did not direct those games. Instead, they were directed by some new young talent, John Johannes. Now, that is something that I want to know about all of this, though, because we still kind of lack context here. We know that Tango Gameworks is gone. That much we know. But I want more clarification if they retained any of that talent from these studios. Now, if they retained John Johannes and some of that Hi-Fi Rush team as an example, then this situation might feel a little bit better. I mean, it's still unfortunate, but so far we don't know that specific information. Hopefully more details will come out soon, but in my honest opinion, as a fan, I think all of this is just beyond frustrating. I mean, it was just a few years ago. I was very optimistic about the future of gaming, and I was very optimistic for the Xbox brand as a whole. That only strengthened as they built their studios up with more hires. You know, they were growing all these studios. They've been very pro-consumer for the most part. And most importantly, for the first time ever, Xbox had the studios and the talent to feed their consoles and subscriptions. So everything kind of felt like it was set in place for Xbox to have this big future. And that's why I think 2024 is even more deflating. To see this new, more corporate mindset from them, I think is deflating. And that is something that I have increasingly believed as this year has gone by. The more 2024 has unraveled, the more convinced that I've become that Team Xbox is no longer running the show. The moves that they've made this year, some of which goes directly against some of the statements that they've made in the past, and we're going to come back to that here in just a moment, but it smells of Microsoft's leadership. I mean, we've even heard rumblings that there is an internal power struggle within Xbox right now. And the more you think about that, the more it makes sense. I mean, you have to realize that Microsoft paid $70 billion for Activision Blizzard. This is the biggest acquisition ever, not just for Xbox, not just for the game industry, but for Microsoft as a company. So there's going to be a lot more focus on their gaming sector than ever before. And Microsoft wants that return on investment. So it's completely possible that Microsoft's leadership has taken charge of the Xbox brand. And that might be why some of these decisions is a little off-putting for us longtime gamers. It basically goes directly against what the brand has stood for in the past and what Team Xbox has also said in the past. I mean, as one such example, just last year, Aaron Greenberg said this about Hi-Fi Rush. Hi-Fi Rush was a breakout hit for us and our players in all key measurements and expectations. We couldn't be happier with what the team at Tango Gameworks delivered with this surprise release. Then fast forward to today. I mean, you're just talking about 1 year later, and they've since shut the studio down. It just doesn't really make a lot of sense with what he just said. I mean, we can speculate on whether it sold enough copies. Who knows? It is a Game Pass game after all. But that's also something important to keep in mind here. If Game Pass is Xbox's prized horse, you know, this is what all of their studios are building towards, then I assume that the metrics are judged differently for those games, and that's why this statement kind of reads this way. Their key measurements is not just for units sold, and that's simply it. So looking back at that response, they were either lying back then, or something has changed within Xbox. And I am under the belief that there has been an internal change. I mean, we know that there's been a business change, but it does kind of smell like Microsoft, not Team Xbox, but Microsoft has taken charge. You know, as ironic as it might sound, the Activision Blizzard acquisition changed Xbox in a way that fans were not expecting. There was a lot of excitement for this buyout and how it could change Xbox going forward. But I think that it's changed Xbox in a way that fans were not expecting. It seems like it's basically pushed Microsoft all in on gaming. And what we're seeing is that Microsoft as a company views gaming differently than what Team Xbox does. I mean, speaking of Game Pass, I can only imagine how some of these Xbox studios are currently feeling after this outcome, because this changes expectations for their upcoming games that they've been developing for years now. This is not a good sign for smaller creative games that might not push a lot of units outside of Game Pass. You know, some of these upcoming games might even exist with Game Pass in mind. You know, these studios were promised creative freedom, so to see a change of heart from Microsoft has to be discouraging for some of these studios. I mean, we'll see what happens with all this. I think this conversation is still evolving, and I'm still hoping that we'll get some more clarification in the coming days. And if we do, of course, I'll keep you all updated. But I want to hear y'all's thoughts about all of this. Obviously, I'm super disappointed. I'm a huge fan of Hi-Fi Rush. It was one of my favorite games last year. It's really just one of my favorite Xbox games, period. And I thought Tango Gameworks was really just one of the most promising up-and-coming studios across the entire industry. So I think this goes directly against what gamers want. I think it goes directly against what Xbox stands for with their emphasis on creative freedom. But let me hear what you all think about this situation. I think there's going to be a lot of opinions on this. There's going to be a lot of discussion about what's going on. So let me hear your thoughts in the comments below, and we'll reapproach this topic probably in the nearest future, as I do imagine we will hear more. Okay, so with the bad news out of the way, though, we do at least have one thing to look forward to here, and that's the Switch successor. It honestly feels like we need the Switch 2 to inject some more excitement for the game industry right now. And the good news here is that Nintendo finally confirmed its existence. This is not just a rumor, it is confirmed, and they also gave us a hint as to when they will announce it. Now, this was actually done through a tweet, surprisingly. That's not something I would have expected, but you can see here they said, "This is Furukawa, president of Nintendo. We will make an announcement about the successor to Nintendo Switch within this fiscal year. It will have been over 9 years since we announced the existence of Nintendo Switch back in March of 2015. We will be holding a Nintendo Direct this June regarding the Nintendo Switch software lineup for the latter half of 2024, but please be aware that there will be no mention of the Nintendo Switch successor during that presentation." So this really tells us two different things. One is that we will hear about the Switch successor by March of 2025, which is when their fiscal year ends. So that means technically they could announce it early in 2025. We can't rule that out. That doesn't necessarily mean that we will hear about it in 2024. Now, they're also not saying if it'll release this fiscal year, but based on some of the rumors that we've previously heard, the best case scenario here is that it'll drop in early 2025. However, I still don't want to get people's hopes up too much, just because there is a very realistic chance that they could announce it in early 2025, as I just mentioned, and then drop it in their next fiscal year. I mean, we'll see about all of that when the time comes, but we are closing in on that next generation Nintendo console. Finally, this is no longer just a rumor, and the mere fact that we will hear about it sometime soon is incredibly, incredibly exciting. As I've said a few times these past few weeks, it does kind of feel like the floodgates have opened, and with this information, it all kind of makes sense now. Those leaks are going to come in hot and heavy over the next few months, and I'm really excited to hear more about this console. As we all know, Nintendo does an amazing job with their games. They really do make some of the best games in the industry, and the idea that this next console will be paired with more power, I feel like we really haven't seen a major power jump from them since the GameCube days, as hard as that's to believe. But this next console could potentially put them more in line with consoles like the PlayStation 4, and to me, that is more than enough power for Nintendo and their games. The next Zelda game is going to be crazy to see. The other interesting part about this announcement, though, is that they also confirmed a June Direct. So that's just 1 month away, and it's going to focus on that latter half of 2024. Right now, we know absolutely nothing for what they have planned, but there are some rumors out there that they could announce some more GameCube remasters. There's been a lot of talk about Zelda Wind Waker HD and Twilight Princess. I still don't know if they'll release that as a bundle, as some people are hoping. I wouldn't be surprised at all if they release those separately, because, this is Nintendo, and they're going to maximize the money that they can bring in. We'll see about all of that, though, if they even exist in the first place. We've also heard about a potential F-Zero GX remaster, and while I understand a lot of people still want a brand new F-Zero game, I think if this game comes back with an online mode, that alone will make its release incredible. Then there's also a potential Metroid Prime 2 and 3 remaster. They do need to get this out before the eventual Metroid Prime 4, and speaking of that game, there is a chance that we could see that as well. For me, I still believe that it could be a cross-generation game, but if it's not, this really is the last chance for them to reveal it as a current Switch-only title. So, you know what? We'll see what happens with all this. I'm hoping for the best here. I love me some Nintendo, and I'm excited to see what they have planned for their current generation, as well as that eventual Switch successor. Do subscribe, though, because I will keep you all updated every step of the way. Anyways, though, that's going to be it for this episode. It was definitely a very high and low episode. But as always, do let me hear what you all think about all of this in the comments below. I imagine there's a lot of different opinions, and I want to hear what you all think about all of this. Until next time, though, peace out.